welcome to the Successful Academic Careers presentation series. And today I'm joined by Chris Littlewood, who is a physiotherapist. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rebecca. So I qualified as a physiotherapist back in 1998, spent almost 10 years working clinically as a physiotherapist, both in the NHS and in a private clinic. And then over recent years, I've been employed as a full-time academic. And at the moment, I work as a professor of musculoskeletal research at Manchester Metropolitan University.
Right, so you've been on a journey from a physiotherapist right through to a professor of physiotherapy. So shall we unpick that a little bit? So what made you move on to a research path?
I remember really early on as a student physio, just having lots of questions about what I was being taught, but also questions about the things that we as physiotherapists did. And in the late 90s, early noughties, when you looked around for answers, it was hard to find good research that would answer the clinical questions that you had. So I think that was my inspiration, really. So I began to dip my own toe into research, whether it just be reviewing literature or writing small pieces. But then I was fortunate. I was at a clinical conference, and an established researcher, Stephen May from Sheffield, just made a request, would anyone like to join me doing a systematic review? And I put my hand up, and working alongside Stephen in that way, seeing someone of his caliber and someone that I really admired, seeing how he approached a research question and delivered a high quality piece of work, I guess was the next level of inspiration beyond the questions that I had.
Okay, so you embarked on a systematic review. You had a good role model to follow, and then what happened?
Yeah, again, a lot of this was due to Stephen. So I always admired Stephen, the way that he could respond to questions and had such a vast knowledge of the research evidence. And previously, Stephen had done an MSc in health services research at the University of Sheffield. And I thought that's exactly what I need, because at the time I was doing a clinical training course, a postgrad clinical training course. And I looked around and I thought, I don't need more of this. I need something different. I need to understand research and research methods in more depth. So I applied to the University of Sheffield for the same MSc in health services research, was accepted onto that, and then had 2 years of a part-time MSc beginning to learn the trade of research. And what was great about that MSc, which was based in the School of Health and Related Research at the University of Sheffield, is that you get to see a professional research environment. You get to engage with professional researchers and understand how they got to where they got to and the kind of work they did. So that really was my inspiration. Working with Stephen, initiating some formal training, and then as a culmination of that, beginning to do some of my own very basic research work and beginning to develop a publication profile.
Great. So you did your MSc for 2 years part-time, and you were surrounded by other researchers, so you could really see how learn your trade and work out how to develop your own research questions. So then what happened after the MSc?
Well, whilst I was doing my MSc, I was still working full-time as a physio, and beginning to ask questions of my employer about, how can we integrate this training that I'm getting? How can I develop as a clinical academic within this environment? And at the time, so this was 2003 to 2005, the opportunities were quite limited to develop as a clinical academic. It was one or it was the other. And I was keen to develop the academic side of my role. And around that time, a little bit later actually, there was an opportunity to apply for a senior lectureship position at Sheffield Hallam University. So essentially that was a teaching role within physiotherapy. So I applied for that role. Initially it was a part-time position, and I thought I'll try and balance the clinical role with the part-time teaching. Was successful at the interview, but then Hallam fortunately said, we can make this a full-time position if you like. So I left the NHS at that time and moved into a full-time academic position in 2007. That was.
Right, so that was that split between teaching and research then?
Well, at the time, and I still think to a large degree now, lots of the lectureships in physiotherapy are still, the institutional priority is teaching. So what I actually found, and it was really interesting, my research outputs actually dropped moving from my clinical role into the teaching role, because there's such an investment in your time learning the trade of becoming an educator. And the institutional priority at the time was teaching. So essentially I spent the next 3.5 years predominantly teaching, with some protected time for research, but perhaps not as much as I expected. And again, at that stage, I was still keen to develop as a researcher. I really enjoyed the 3.5 years at Hallam, and the teaching that I did and engaging with the students. It was a fantastic time, but I still had that burning desire to want to develop as an independent researcher. So it was 2011 that there was an advert for a research fellow in systematic reviewing at the University of Sheffield, where I did my MSc, so just across the city. And in terms of grade, it was a sideways step, and it wasn't particularly into an area that fully enthused me, even though I'd been engaged with systematic reviews. This wasn't a role that would undertake systematic reviews relating to musculoskeletal problems and physiotherapy related problems. This was more of a generic systematic reviewer position. But I thought this is a really good opportunity to learn the trade of research, or increase my understanding of research in what is a research intensive institution. So I hopped across the city and began that role. And one of the things that happened around that time was that I applied for an NIHR fellowship to undertake my PhD, so what's now called the Doctoral Fellowship. So I started at the University of Sheffield in March, and actually in August of that year, I found out that I'd been awarded the fellowship. So quite quickly after starting at the University of Sheffield, essentially I had this wonderful opportunity of a fellowship, a 3-year full-time fellowship to undertake my PhD. In a fantastic institution with lots of support. So that was a real critical moment for me to get that fellowship and to have that time, not just the time to do research, but the time to engage in a really good training program, and perhaps more importantly, time to develop my networks and my collaborations, just to get my name known to people and just to start to develop those working relationships.
Yeah, that sounds like the launch pad for your research career then, having that doctorate opportunity to get the protected time that you needed for research.
It absolutely was, yeah.
So you've alluded to a couple of hurdles, one of them being trying to get that protected time when there was limited opportunities for clinical academics back then. What sort of other hurdles did you face?
Yeah, I mean, the main two have always been it's the time and it's the institutional support and the priorities of the institution. One of the, would you call this a hurdle? I think so. At the end of my PhD fellowship, I applied for a postdoctoral fellowship. And in my mind, I'd done a good job of my PhD, quite a few publications, developed, a presence in the field. And I was almost assuming that I'd move straight on to the postdoc fellowship, but that wasn't awarded. And at the time at the University of Sheffield, me as a physiotherapist by background, interested in musculoskeletal problems, there wasn't an established research group in that area. So I very much felt like I'm at a crossroads now. I, as an individual at the University of Sheffield, I wasn't making things work for myself. I tried the postdoc fellowship, wasn't successful. I was thinking about another project grant that wasn't going very well. And there was opportunity at the University of Sheffield, but more research support roles, which at that time, that wasn't really a priority for me. I still wanted to develop as an independent researcher. And I think that's when my next stroke of luck came, really. Well, maybe not a stroke of luck, because this was part of a collaboration that I developed, a network through my PhD. But Nadine Foster, Professor Nadine Foster at Keele reached out to me and said, how would you feel about coming over to Keele for half of your week on a secondment? Let's work together. Let's develop these research ideas. So that very much, again, gave me that next step on, I guess, up the ladder, really. So I went over to work with Nadine and other colleagues at Keele. And whilst on secondment there, a full-time research position became available, which I applied for and then fortunately got. So I started working full-time at Keele in November 2016.
And what was that role called?
That was a senior lecturer in clinical trials.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I spent some of my time in the clinical trials unit, but then some of my time still working on my own research. And quite quickly after starting at Keele, I got my first major project grant, and then subsequently, 12 months after, I was awarded an advanced or a postdoc fellowship. So that move was really important to me, and just that shift and that change and different support mechanisms, working with different people, I think just helped me to elevate my game a little bit. So that was fantastic. But that came with the cost of, at the time I was still living in Yorkshire, and the commute was 5 hours there and back. And that's really telling when you've got, still a pretty young family, and it was just draining up at 5:30 in the morning, getting home at 7 at night. So I remember one evening after I'd been stuck in the snow in the hills, and then one evening I got caught in floods in Glossop on the way home, and I got home to my wife and I said, I don't think I can carry on doing this. And this was only a month after starting full time. And she just said, and completely surprisingly, she said, well, why don't we move then? Wow. And that was a big thing, because we've got 3 kids, the eldest of high school age, who were pretty settled, to be honest. But it wasn't sustainable. That round trip just wasn't sustainable. So we ended up moving, and that brought huge amounts of guilt. You can imagine you're moving your kids from where they grew up, from their family, and also their school, and the sole reason you're moving is because of you. There's no other reason. So that brought some real soul searching. But we moved over. The commute became obviously much easier. It was down to less than half an hour then. Unfortunately, the kids settled reasonably well. But that was a real hurdle to overcome, that personal tension.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the work-life balance, if you've got a 5-hour commute, would be completely out of proportion, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So I was leaving for work before the kids had even got up, before my wife would get up, and I was coming home when the kids were pretty much winding down. And I hadn't been used to that. I mean, Sheffield was still an hour away, but it was still very manageable. A reasonably easy commute, and combined with working from home, it meant I could still take the kids to school and pick them up most weeks. But yeah, that changed dramatically. But it was interesting, because it was such a fantastic opportunity. From my perspective, I almost didn't have any other options, but it still created a real toll. But we made a decision as a family, and we moved to the wrong side of the hills, but everything's okay now.
So once you'd got that doctorate, it sounds like moving over to Keele allowed you to start to apply for your own grants and use that collaboration that you built up to springboard yourself into becoming an independent researcher with your own grant.
Yeah, I think the key difference with Keele was that there was an established research group there, but established in the area that I was interested in. So I became very quickly part of a big team, a team that really undertakes robust reviews of work, is really collaborative in nature, and you can really see how that approach helps develop really high quality research proposals, research bids, and I think that's what I was lacking. I was lacking that group at Sheffield, which Nadine, invited me into, and so I think there are other people, and I could mention lots of people, but as influential as Stephen May was earlier in my career, at that midpoint, Nadine was incredibly important, and I sit here now thinking, I wonder where I would have been without that support from Nadine.
Oh, that's lovely. So, what other support and inspiration helped you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, it's people so often. So, for example, Sue Mawson, Professor Sue Mawson in Sheffield, who was one of my PhD supervisors, really, helped me to understand the infrastructure, put me in touch with people, and was such a supportive and fantastic person. Um, there's always the support of your family you need. I mean, as an academic, you can be away from home, quite a bit. You travel quite a lot, and when you've got kids and too many pets, all that stuff, it all needs managing, doesn't it? So that's been an incredibly important part of it. Very early on, someone who was incredibly influential was a physiotherapist called Julie Shepherd. Julie was an editor for a small professional journal, and she was also an educator on one of the clinical courses that I did really early on. And Julie was incredibly patient with me. She encouraged me to write for the journal. It might just be a case report or a reflection or something, but she spent lots of time, feeding back in a really constructive way. Someone who initially would write and want to prove a point and make a point hard, she helped me just turn my writing down and be more balanced and just generally more constructive. So to have Stephen and Julie in those early years, I think would just tremendously useful. And of course, not everybody can have their own Stephen and Julie, but again, I look back to those people who just helped develop a bit of self-confidence, I think, and then enable you to start to just make your own path a little bit.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of the academics I've spoken to have talked about really ruthless feedback and, coping with multiple rejections and keeping going in the face of that adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing I learned from Stephen really early on. The first project we did together, the peer review came back and it was like, wow, this is ruthless. But Stephen, just in the way he did, he just set about responding to it in a systematic way and in a balanced way. And that helped me. You can imagine in those early years really looking up to Stephen and thinking, well, if Stephen can have such harsh feedback, it's okay if I get it then, because he's trod this path. So when I got that kind of feedback, it was, well, this is just par for the course. I'm okay with this. I'll try and respond. And I think that is one of the things that hits people when they enter this academic world. It can be harsh. I think lots of feedback is pretty constructive, but the reality is rejection is pretty commonplace. And you use the term, you've got to develop a thick skin, and I'm not sure that's correct. And Nadine Foster once said to me, it's about developing a healthy thick skin. So you've got to deal with rejection, but you've also got to know when to put an idea down because it's dead in the water. So you've got to be reflective as well. But I think it was about 18 months ago, I was just pulling together my professional development folder, just tidying it up. And I looked through all my rejection letters and my success letters, and rejection outweighs success so much. It's incredible. Just some standout points for me. Before I got my first fellowship study funding, I'd just been rejected from our Chartered Society of Physiotherapy for a very similar bid. So it was rejection, then success. I was then rejected from my postdoc fellowship the first time round, but then got the then got an RFPB grant. And then there are lots of other applications that I've put in that you just get rejection. And I guess I'm fortunate because I've never really taken it personally. I always just see it as a point, it's learning. Sometimes it's pretty clear that a reviewer's just missed the point. Sometimes it's just the wrong time for that funding body or that journal, but you just reflect, you learn and think, can we go again? And let's see where we can go with this. And I think the sooner that you recognize that is part of this academic life, the easier it becomes. I'm not saying it's not challenging, but just it's part of this world. It is what it is. So
yeah, that sounds like really great advice. Thinking about other physiotherapists who may want to start embarking on an academic career, what would you say to them about what makes a successful academic career today?
Yeah, I think there are a few points, and I do give this feedback to people when they do get in touch. But the first thing is that you have to be strategic. And what I mean by that is that sometimes as a clinician, you can have a research idea that's important to you, and that's absolutely fine. And I would never question that. But to be successful in this world, you have to convince other people that that research question is important, that there's potential for patient benefit, and you've got to convince research funders to invest their money in you. So sometimes you might have one idea, but if you're going to be strategic, you need to think, well, what's important to other people as well? And often there's some common ground, but think about research priorities. And I guess if you are strategic, you do develop that base where you can explore some of these other more potentially nuanced ideas. But first thing, it might be important to you, but is it important to other people, and can you convince them? That would be my first piece of advice. The second one, I think, would be to be collaborative. Don't develop your work in silos. Don't think it's going to be better by not showing it anybody. Try not to just work, within your group, within your institution. Be collaborative, reach out. I think, as I looked to Stephen and then to Nadine, people who had forged the path that I wanted to go on. So I reached out to them, and I'd say to people, if anyone is listening, do reach out to people. Pick up the phone or send them an email, or if face-to-face conferences return, do make a point of introducing yourself. And I understand it's challenging, and I've been there as that person who used to stand behind the poster at a conference and try not to talk to people and look busy reading my program 8 times. You see it all the time, and I understand that, but to try and just say, hi, I'm interested in this. Could we have a discussion at some point? Or, as I said, send an email, get in touch via Twitter. And I think what you'll find is that more people are supportive than aren't, but those people won't come looking for you. You've got to go looking for them. And I know, at any one time, I'm working with lots of people, supporting them at various levels, whether they're thinking about the internship, for example, or the pre-doctoral clinical academic fellowship, or whether they're looking for the doctoral fellowship, or currently doing their PhD, or the postdoc opportunities as well. So reach out to people, and if someone doesn't get back to you, try someone else. And the other piece of advice is that what I see, and I completely understand this as well, especially the NIHR infrastructure and the research infrastructure generally, it's really complex. And when you're within it, you think, well, why is it complex? This does this, that, they have that role. But from the outside, it's incredibly complex to understand about how you can dip your toe into research and begin to climb that ladder. So try and familiarize yourself with the opportunities, and you'll have opportunities to speak to people when you do reach out, but seek a mentor and let that mentor help take you on that path, is what I would say. But collaboration, reach out, and be strategic.
Sounds really good advice, Chris. Thanks very much for your time today. Is there anything else you want to add, or you're happy with that?
No, thanks, Rebecca. I can just hear that the dogs come back in, so I think it might be a good time to end. Otherwise, there might be some carnage.
Dogs and children, thank you for the time. Hey? Okay. Thanks very much, Chris. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers, you too. Bye.